Hola, bienvenidos a todos. Muchísimas gracias. Bienvenidos a todos de nuevo a nuestra sección de entrevista. Muchísimas gracias por seguirnos. Hoy tenemos el enorme placer de tener a dos austríacos de excelencia, el profesor Walter Block y el profesor Bill Barnett, que son los dos coautores, ¿no?, de muchos de los grandes ensayos de la escuela austríaca. Y es de verdad para nosotros un verdadero placer. Los dos son profesores en la Universidad de New Orleans. Y de verdad les invito a todos que lean sus ensayos, sus artículos y sus libros. Thank you very much, Professor Block and Professor Barnett, for being with us. I just introduced you in Spanish and said that you're among the most important points of reference in the Austrian libertarian movement. So it's a pleasure and a real honor to have both of you with us.
Did I ever tell you my Spanish joke?
Yes, but you can maybe
I'll do it again. In order to get a PhD at Columbia, when I was a student there, you had to have two languages, and I'm horrible at all languages, but they allowed you to substitute math for one language, and I passed math, and I needed one more language. I had Spanish 4 years in high school and 3 years in college, and I knew no Spanish. However, they allowed you to have a Spanish-English dictionary all the time you wanted, and you translated from Spanish to English, and I passed. I took the exam with two guys from Mexico, both of whom failed because they couldn't make a good English sentence to save themselves. And I used to tease them about how much better my Spanish was than theirs because I passed the test and they didn't. That's my Spanish joke.
That's heard many times.
So the idea of this interview is to discuss. Well, I discussed with Professor Block the other time on the controversies, or at least his disagreements with Rothbard with regards to libertarian topics or ethical or deontological topics. Yet both of you also have some, right? The core issues are obviously in agreement, but some issues where you diverge in a significant way with regards to economics. So I don't know where you would like to start. I was thinking maybe regards to your issues with his idea of the connection between wealth and time preference, for example, that, as you write, is Rothbard and Hoppe and maybe to some extent Mises think there is a necessary connection between wealth or the level of income and the degree of time preference. So the idea is, as more income, as a person gets wealthier, other things equal, according to Rothbard, according to Hoppe, according to maybe Mises as well, the lower the degree of time preference. So why is this wrong, and why is it apodictic? Not apodictic, sorry.
I'd like to start, but I'm a professor, and professors are never allowed to answer the question asked. So I'll answer a different question, and then maybe I'll take a hack at the one you mentioned. Before we start, I just wanted to mention, I think I speak for Bill, I'm sure I speak for Bill on this, and that is that Bill and I are both Misesians and Rothbardians. We both revere those two scholars. We both think the world of them. We think, I certainly think they are the two best economists who have ever written. We agree with them on 99.9% of everything in Austrian economics, and also in libertarian theory. And yet we are criticizing them on about 8 or 10 different issues. And I wanted to mention that we're not a cult. If you're in the Ayn Rand cult and you criticize Ayn Rand, they kick you out. This is not a cult, even though Gary Becker and James Buchanan, once each of them said that Austrianism is a cult. We're not a cult. We disagree with everybody. We disagree with each other. Bill and I disagree with each other on some issues. We disagree with Salerno, Hoppe, Garrison, other eminent Austrian economists, which doesn't mean that we don't have a core of support.
We disagree with each other.
That's right. We certainly do. And you're wrong on all those issues, Bill. And Rothbard himself criticized Mises. He disagreed with him on monopoly theory and antitrust. And whenever you disagree with the leaders, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Rothbard and Mises are the Bach and Mozart of Austrian economics. And when you disagree with them, you do so very tentatively. You expect that if they were still around, they could pin you up against the wall. But, we have to be true to our own views. And so we have criticized them in public. Now, with that preface, let me just say that I think that there is an empirical connection between wealth and time preference. So the richer you get, the less impatient you are, the lower your implicit rate of interest is. But it's not praxeological, because I can think of a case where I just win $1 million in the lottery or 10 million in the lottery, and all of a sudden I become more impatient. Did I commit a logical contradiction? I don't think so. So therefore, Bill and I disagree with Hans and Murray on this relationship. They think it's apodictic. We think it's a broad empirical generalization, but not necessarily so. Bill, do you want to?
I agree with that. But I also think that that is not one of the more important areas that we have in disagreement with, for example, Rothbard, but a lot of them, Rothbard and Mises, kind of thing. I put together a little list of about 11 things, and why don't I read these to you? And if you see one that interests you and you want to go into it, let me know. But the first one is that we say money is a capital good. And they say no. Okay, money is sui generis. We put out our reasons for that in a somewhat lengthy article in a journal. I don't know if you want to explore that one. But we don't think money is sui generis. We think it's a capital good. It's like any other capital good. It fits into the structure of production. And like, capital goods are used to, in the Austrian language, move, process goods from higher stages to lower stages, getting goods closer to consumption. And that's what we use money for. And just as we use a truck to move goods from, one place where they're produced to another place where they're closer to the consumer, we use money for the same thing. So I don't know if you want to look at that anymore.
Sure. And I think that it's a very important topic, because as I was reading again your article on, I think it's from 2005. I'm wrong on this, but it's interesting. The important thing is that it has been a traditional thing from Mises to Rothbard of considering money, maybe even from David Hume, for example, or the classical economists, of completely separating money from the real structure of production. Now, try to be a devil's advocate, so to speak. The traditional idea is, you increase the amount of consumer goods, you have more consumer goods, other things equal. You increase the amount of production goods, and you have more consumer goods in the future. And the traditional Misesian argument is, if you or the Humean argument, right? It's at the end of the day, it's a Humean argument. You increase the money supply, everybody has more money, say more gold, yet consumer goods and producer goods in general have not changed. So doesn't the fact that money is a capital good imply that the more money is better, other things equal, and isn't that contra? I'm trying to be the devil's advocate too.
No. I understand that, and of course that's an argument. But you're faced with a dilemma then, unless you buy into the concept that voluntary actions among people, can be market failures. Because if we are in a free society and using something like gold coins for money, okay, so you go out and you discover a vein of gold somewhere, and you start mining it, and you melt it and turn it into coins and all. Well, that if those additional units of money are of no value to society, which is what Rothbard and Mises say, then what you've just done is wasted society's scarce resources, and we have a market failure. And yet we don't believe that. And so he said, well, where is the benefit then from just if we have more tractors, we know what the benefit of that is. What is the benefit of having more gold coins in a world where gold coins are money? The benefit is that you can facilitate more transactions. And every voluntary exchange between people increases more satisfaction. And you can do more if you have more coins.
Or more trucks. Bill mentioned trucks. Well, if you have more trucks, you can facilitate more bringing of stuff from producers to the consumers. Well, if you have more money, you can also. And I just want to add one thing. When Bill mentioned higher order to lower order, that's one way to put it. Roger Garrison would put it earlier order to later order, because he wants to make this more amenable to the mainstream. But I was brought up with the Hayekian Triangle, as was Bill. Roger came along a lot after Hayek, so I also think of it in terms of higher order to lower order. But I'm trying to, wean myself into earlier and later orders, because I think Roger made a very good point. But I wanted to stand on the shoulders of Bill on this and mention that the market failure is a very important thing for Austrians. The big three market failures are monopoly and externalities and public goods. And if there's one thing that Austrians are fully united on, and pretty much this is a litmus test, if you're not on this, you're hardly an Austrian, is that there ain't no such thing as a market failure. Monopoly is not a market failure. Public goods not a market failure. Externality is not a market failure. And yet, if you take the view that money is sui generis and it's not a producer's good, then you, Bernardo, we accused you of finding gold and minting it and mining it and coming up with. You just created a market failure. You wasted society's resources. You're a real rascal. You shouldn't do that. You're ruining Austrian economics. Namely, the position that they have is sort of a contradiction of everything else that Austrians know about market failure. So I think Bill is making a very strong point here, and I just wanted to emphasize that.
I must say, I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, also with regards to my view, because when I read your paper, your paper, especially the one on the optimum quantity of money, which is the one that convinces me the most. The other one, the idea of money as a capital good, I'm still trying to think it through personally. But I was talking, for example, to Professor Philip Bagos, who's my professor. We're debating this issue, and I really think that your point is extremely thought-provoking in the sense that effectively, if every quantity of money is exactly the same, right, and stipulating that money has no other use, like Bitcoin, for example, we enter in a world of Bitcoin and somebody mines new Bitcoin for some reason, then of course, if every quantity of money serves the same function or serves the same function as money in the exact same way, or it's sufficient, then of course it seems that it's kind of a market failure. So I really think that your point is very important. Now, one might say,
if I could, one point. Those two papers that we wrote, that I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, whatever, but those two papers seem to me that they are inextricably linked in my mind, okay? In other words, the idea of money as a capital good and the optimum quantity of money, well, if money's not a capital good, it is sui generis, then I think Mises and Rothbard are right. Why do you need more money? You see? That whatever amount of money you have will do all that money can do. So I just put a little icing on the cake. To me, those two concepts, they came together, and so we two articles, but they're inextricably linked in my mind.
Each supports the other. Let's try this following mental experiment. Suppose gold was the money and we only had 1 ounce of gold in the whole world. Would it work? Yeah, it would work, but it would help if we had a 2nd ounce or a 3rd ounce. It wouldn't hurt if we had more ounces. It would grease the wheels of commerce a little bit better. We could do it with 1 ounce. I mean, then a popsicle would cost 1/1,000,000th of an ounce or something like that. It would be awkward. So I don't think that the optimal amount of money is 1 ounce of gold, and I think the optimal quantity of money is whatever the market comes up with.
Right. No, that I think is a very important point. Now, I'm trying to again see if I can bring out the other point of view. The idea. One of the things you point out in your article, both in the money as a capital good, especially on the one on the optimum quantity of money, is that, as you say, the more quantity of money, other things equal, provided that it's a free market money, it's done voluntarily and so forth, then facilitate exchanges, because on the margin there are some exchanges that are not worthwhile if money is expensive, right? And the more quantity of money you mine, the less expensive it becomes, and it increases, right, marginally the transactions. But one might say, yet what if doesn't this argument depend on how the money increases, in the sense that, let's say, all the gold, the new gold that is mined simultaneously by all people, and everybody spends it exactly in the same time period, right? Isn't there, don't prices adjust, so to speak, simultaneously, so that no further exchanges can be made? I don't know if I made myself clear in the reason.
I don't think that's accurate. In other words, there has to be, if you think of money as facilitating transactions, okay, there is a cost to using the monetary commodity as money, as opposed to using it for jewelry, if it's gold, assuming it's gold, as opposed to using it for jewelry or some industrial purpose. And so, there's a cost to it. And so if we voluntarily decide we want to pay that cost, in other words, forego the alternative use to use it to facilitate exchanges, it's because we think facilitating those additional exchanges that it would, facilitate are more valuable than its alternative use in industry or jewelry or whatever. We could do that, right? You mined that gold. You're the one who decided to make coins out of it. You could have sold it for jewelry, but you didn't. So it tells you it's got more value facilitating exchange than at least ex ante, which is all we can do, right? I mean, we all make mistakes all the time, I still remember how much I had to spend when my daughter was in high school, and she absolutely had to have a black leather jacket, which cost me a fortune. And then she wore it 2 or 3 times. That was a mistake. Okay. But that's ex post. So we all understand that. So that's my position on that. In a free market, if the newly mined gold goes to make money, it's because it's more valuable in whatever it does, which is facilitate transactions.
Let me try something out on you guys that I haven't really thought about, and I might be all wrong. But suppose that, again, we had 1 ounce of gold, and gold was money, and suppose we got more money and it didn't facilitate any more exchanges. Just suppose. Don't ask me why it wouldn't. It would, but suppose it didn't. Still, it would be valuable. It would make each exchange easier. Again, I think of 1 ounce. I'm not sure about this. I just thought about this. But see, one way to look at the value of gold is, as Bill said, well, we're foregoing jewelry or teeth for industrial purposes or whatever. Another way is that it'll facilitate more exchanges. But a third way might be, and I'm not sure about this, I just thought about it, that even if it didn't facilitate any more exchanges, each exchange that would have occurred anyway would be somehow easier, less transactions cost, or I don't know, something, because it really be a pain.
Discuss that, Walter. I disagree.
You disagree? I'm not sure about that. I just thought about it, but I'd have to think more about it. But it occurred to me that it might be easier in some way.
Okay. It doesn't depend on the stickiness of prices and these things, right? Your argument.
Well, the idea is that if we had 1 ounce of gold and then we would making exchanges in billionths of an ounce of gold, that would be a pain in the neck. Whereas if we had more gold, we wouldn't have to do that. So for the mathematically challenged of us, it would be easier. But as I say, this is just a speculation right off the top of my head, and Bill and I are going to have to chew over this one maybe.
Right. I just to have things clear. Rothbard had this model, which, as I kind of mentioned before, sort of mimics what in 1752 Hume said in his famous article on money, right? Suppose that in Great Britain, everybody, I don't know, there's a doubling of the money supply. And he had this Angel Gabriel model where suddenly everybody has more money in his pockets, so to speak, and the night the angel Gabriel gives money to everybody. I was wondering, does your argument, let's suppose that we're in a gold standard and money increases to everybody in the same way, and there is this sort of angel Gabriel model, would you still disagree with Rothbard that there would be social advantages to this?
Well, first of all, I think, and this is, I'll give, certainly Menga, that, economics is causal realist. We have to be realistic. And the helicopter money that you're talking about, the Friedmanian helicopter money, that doesn't happen in the real world. And we wouldn't have any Cantillon effects, right, if we had helicopter money. So I'll put that aside. But let's just say the angel Gabriel, as you said, came down. And you have to remember, it wouldn't just have to give everybody equal, everybody would have to get the same proportion of the new money as they have the existing money, but every contract denoted in monetary terms would have to adjust, and every value implicit. In other words, you weren't ready to sell your house, but it has a certain conceptual monetary value, right? Well, that would have to adjust too. So to me, it's like arguing, how many angels can you fit on the head of a pin? And the answer is, are there angels? And I don't know. But the other thing is that if we all got that extra money, what would we find? We would find that as we started to spend money on things, prices went up, right? And then people might decide, well, that now to buy something with that gold coin is not worth it. And money would, remember, it has alternative uses. Money, the gold coins, some of them would get melted down and put to other uses.
Right. Walter, I don't know if you would like to add something to this, or.
Well, you know what it sounds to me like? It sounds to me like fiat money. I mean, that's what the Fed does. It distributes it out, maybe not in proportion to what everyone had, as Bill was insisting upon correctly, but it sounds like fiat currency, and the vestige of fiat currency is always in the back of our minds, and I think that's why Mises and Rothbard, maybe, I'm psychologizing here, I'm trying to figure out why it is that they made this error. Maybe in the back of their minds they were thinking of fiat currency, and if it was fiat currency, then all bets are off. There's no question that doubling the fiat currency isn't going to help anything. If anything, it'll create the Austrian business cycle theory, create the Austrian business cycle. Because that's what Austrian business cycle theory is about. It'll lower the interest rate artificially and encourage long roundabout processes that are unjustified by the saving investment decisions of the people. So I think that maybe fiat currency is in the back of this angel Gabriel, but we're not talking about that. And as Bill says, this is the way it actually occurs is you, Bernardo, we're accusing you of being the bad guy. You go out and find some gold, and then you mine it and mint it, and you start buying stuff with it. Are you a rascal? Well, I don't think so. You haven't violated any deontological law. It's interesting to bring in the normative, because, if you start doing fiat currency, you are violating deontological law. Whereas if you just go out and discover some gold, you're not. So that would be my contribution.
And regarding the more technical aspects of money as a capital good, there are being criticism of this, and I would like maybe to point out some, so maybe you can propose a counter argument to this. One might say, okay, money is a capital good, so let's stipulate money is a capital good, which means money is a future good to some extent, right? I mean, capital goods are valuable because in the future they produce goods that are available to the consumer. So we might say capital goods are future goods. Doesn't this imply, other things equal, that there is because what is interesting here, as I think it through, is that your argument, which is a small disagreements, in the whole economic theory with regards to Mises and Rothbard, actually brings to many implications, right? That seems to me at odds, or at least points out some differences. For example, one of the traditional Austrian ideas Misesian, right, is that there is no necessary link between the quantity of money and the rate of interest, so to speak. So demand for money or supply of money might or might not change the rate of interest depending on, expectations where the money comes in, right? If it comes through the credit markets or not. Yet, doesn't the idea that money is a capital good first of all imply that there is a necessary connection between the quantity of money and the rate of interest first, and second, doesn't it apply that in all cases an increase in the demand for money or a increase in the supply of money necessarily lowers the rate of interest, given the fact that it's a future good or a capital good?
Well, this is something I was just looking at a Zoom with our YouTube or something with Bob Murphy interviewing Jeff Herbner, okay? And it was about interest, and it was very, very interesting. Interest, and that's one of the issues that comes up, exactly what do you mean by interest, okay? But to me, okay, what interest is, I know what Mises says about originary interest and all that, and Walter and I disagree on this point. This is one of our fundamental disagreements. To me, interest and interest rates, okay, are phenomena or credit phenomena, if you would. In other words, if you don't have credit, you're not going to have interest and interest rates. Now, when you have more money, does that necessarily mean you're going to have more credit? And it would have to be to affect interest rates, it seems to me, that if no more so than an increase in any other kind of capital good. But to me, interest and interest rates come out of credit, not what Mises says. So, it's interesting you raise that because, I happen to have his quote right here, and it's originary interest is the ratio, of the value assigned to want satisfaction in the immediate future and a value assigned to want satisfaction in remoter periods of the future. But you can't have a ratio of values. There's no such thing as a ratio of values. So, so Mises is flat out wrong in that statement. There's no question about that, okay? And to me, interest arises in the transactions involving credit. It's that simple. And so I don't see why increasing the supply of gold coins would necessarily affect that.
Walter,
it does in modern society, because how do we get new money? And this is a question I wanted to raise a few minutes ago. New money in our society is lent into existence. Walter mentioned the Austrian business cycle and talking about new money and all that, and he's talking about the difference between commodity money, gold, and fiat money. But my question is, what would happen if, for example, the U.S. government said, we're going to run these huge deficits this year, but we're not going to sell treasury securities and have that affect, interest rates, and then have the Fed buy those securities and that affect them. What we're going to do is we're just going to print money to cover the deficit. We're not going to lend new money into existence. We're going to spend new money into existence, so that when they spent the new money into existence, it wouldn't go into the credit market. In other words, it wouldn't affect the credit markets directly at all. What would be the effect on interest rates, and would that cause an Austrian-style business cycle like is what we see when they lend new money into existence?
Right. If I may add one thing, just before, it's interesting that there's a passage in Mises where he says actually there's a clear distinction between debt monetization and credit expansion, which seems to me that he actually says something similar to this. Sorry, Walter, I interrupted you.
No problem. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate you being the devil's advocate. And don't be apologetic about it, because it helps us to draw out our views, and this is the way we discover new things. So I think I speak for Bill when I say we appreciate what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bill and I disagree on this. To me, suppose nobody ever heard of lending money to anyone else. There was no credit market, so we just never discovered this. Would there be an interest rate anyway? And Mises and Rothbard and me, I'm putting myself in with the big boys here, we think there would be at least an implicit interest rate, namely the ratio, not of values. Bill is quite right when he says you can't have ratios of values. You know, what are we going to have, utils or something? But ratio of prices. And then we get into wine 5 years and wine 10 years, or trees allowed to grow 10 years or 15 years. And there's an implicit interest rate in the ratios of the same good at different times. Now, Bill and I just had lunch today, and Bill was saying, if I could put words in his mouth, but they're not the same goods. Namely, wine that is in the barrel for 5 years is not the same as wine for 7 years. Well, this sort of gets into the ice in winter and ice in summer problem, which is supposedly a a good criticism of Austrian theory. But the way we figure that out is we say they're different goods. That ice in winter, even though, chemically they're the same thing, H2O frozen. But we need ice in the summer more than we need ice in the winter before the ages of refrigeration. So I guess the view that I have, or the dispute I have with Bill, and here I'm sort of in the mainstream, I'm with Rothbard and Mises, is that if we haven't discovered lending and borrowing, and there were no such things as credit markets, we'd still have an implicit interest rate. Now, what Bill says is, well, no, we would just have different time preferences. Namely, in one island, they would allow trees to grow longer and wine to stay in barrels longer, and the other shorter, so they would be more impatient. But one way of looking at impatient people is that they have a higher implicit rate of interest.
Well, when you talk about trees, Walter, I mean, what you're talking about is growth rates, not interest rates. A very different thing. Throw that one out.
Well, sometimes, in one island, they allow the trees to grow 10 years, and the other, they allow it to grow 15 years because they're less impatient. Well, the less impatient group has a lower interest rate, implicitly at the very least.
Let us not argue about that here now.
Okay, well, Bill and I disagree on that.
We've been arguing about this for close to 20 years. Neither one of us is convinced the other one.
Maybe when we arrive at the 21st, after 21 years, maybe you can agree.
You'll lead us to the promised land, Bernardo.
Exactly. But Walter, so now the idea that there is a distinction between like that interest is a credit phenomenon, so to speak, if I may interpret Bill's words, right? If I don't want to put wrong words in his mouth, but that which is different, right? Than and which is not therefore a real phenomenon, so to speak. And yet you disagree. Then whether that's right or not, I can see that it's a way out of the idea that then an increase in the quantity of money, in the supply of money, or an increase in demand has a necessary impact on the rate of interest. But if you don't agree with that, don't you think that then we must stipulate that there is a necessary relationship between the money market and the rate of interest in a gold standard, in a free market money?
Well, I'm a pure time preference rate of interest person. I think it just stems from the time preferences of the people, their saving and investment decisions. And I don't see a necessary connection between that and the amount of money. There might be an empirical one, for all I know. I don't know, but I don't think it's a praxeological relationship.
But say, for example, that other things equal, there's an increase in demand of capital goods, right? Other things equal, the rate of interest will decrease, correct? if money is a capital good, then wouldn't any increase in the demand for money also bring down the rate of interest?
Well, I don't think necessarily. I guess it depends upon the shape of
You mean demand or supply?
Demand.
Well, one wouldn't think, even if one accepted some other view, that an increase in the demand for money would lead to an increase in to a decrease in interest rates. One would think that would lead to an increase in interest rates.
But if it's a capital good, wouldn't any increase
an increase in the demand for anything is going to tend to increase the price, not reduce it.
Right.
Whether it's a capital good or a consumer good, or even Malta's sui generis.
But isn't and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I thought that in the normal structure of production, if there's an increase in the demand for capital goods and there's a decrease in the demand for consumer goods in relative terms, then the spread between, right, capital goods and consumer goods is lower. And if you consider, right, that the rate of interest is the spread between the stages, right? I was thinking it in that terms. Maybe I'm wrong.
If the demand for consumer goods goes down, okay, and there's a real problem now that you're digging into here. But if the demand for consumer goods goes down, their price will go down, right? And if the demand has shifted to capital goods, that's why the demand went down. The demand for capital goods shifts up, then the price of the capital goods goes up, and the difference between the prices would narrow, right? That's what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
One of the real problems I have with this, and it runs through a lot of stuff. Walt and I were talking about this a little bit at lunch, if I recall right, is that when we talk about, if you look at Mises and Rothbard, they say that prices are set by demand, okay? And that supply, the prices are set by the demand for consumer goods. And that if the demand for consumer goods goes up, that causes the demand for capital goods to go up. And that's why the price of capital goods go up. But although somewhere Murray refers to this, but not in this connection, prices are set by the valuations of human beings, not solely in their role as consumers, but in their role as producers also. In other words, what you don't see being talked about really is consumption, that leisure is a consumer good, consumer service really, and we have a desire for that. Okay, so when the demand changes, it's as if you can only shift between consumer goods and capital goods, and the consumer good that is leisure just falls out of the equation. And I think that's a terrible mistake.
What we were talking about at lunch was Hutt was talking about, consumer sovereignty. And Murray, I think correctly, said, no. Yes, there is consumer sovereignty, but there's also producer sovereignty. And Murray mentioned individual sovereignty is much more the way to go than just looking at it from the consumer point of view. You want to go back to Hazlitt, you have to look at the effects on all the people and not just in the present, but in the future. And Hutt is only looking at half or partial. His look at that part was good. Consumer sovereignty is a good thing. But Murray, I think, was correct in saying that it is also producer sovereignty. And when you add the two together, you get individual sovereignty.
Professor Barnett, you would like to talk about other issues maybe, or you would like to delve into the...
Let's see. Others, these are things that Walter and I disagreed with Rothbard on, which was, something I thought, and we have been, and this is Rothbard and Mises both say, they talk about the demand and supply, demand for money and the supply of money. No such thing, okay? There are demands for money and there are supplies of money, but there's no such thing as demand and supply of money, or demand or supply of money. And a part of that is that money, whereas in a monetary economy, virtually every good has a price in terms of money, because every good is traded against money. But money trades against every good, so money doesn't have a price. It's got a multitude of prices. Whether it's on, huh? So, that's, we published something on that, but it seems to me that that's the kind of thing that we need to keep in mind, or we can make mistakes. Another one, Murray says government can't invest. Government, in real investment, that's nonsense, okay? The government goes out and builds bridges and roads and, all kinds of things, and those are real investments. Now, we may look at that and say, yeah, because the government did it and the way they do it, it's malinvestment, but it's a use of resources, and it's certainly not, in most cases, consumer goods. It's capital goods. So it's investment. And, Murray doesn't buy that. And let's see.
From a deontological point of view, there is a gigantic difference between government and market. But we're not now talking about deontology. We're not talking about rights or ethics. We're just talking about good old economics. And if you look at a bridge or a tunnel or a building or whatever it is, and you didn't know whether government financed it or private people financed it, you couldn't, according to Murray, you couldn't tell. You could tell if you didn't know the difference, you couldn't tell. But what we're trying to say is that if it's a building, whether it was the government that built it, it's the same building. It's an investment if it's private, and it's investment if it's public, because it's the same thing, objectively speaking.
With regards to this, I would like to ask you, Walter, because I was reading, aside from your recent, with your co-author, both of your, the article on this, criticizing Rothbard, in 1998, I think you wrote a very interesting essay, Taxes and the Structure of Production, which it seemed to me you took the opposite position. Did you change your mind on this, or did I misunderstand? No. I'm not, you'd have to fill me in to see if I changed my mind. I don't remember which article you're referring to in '98, but I agree with Bill on this government investment. To say that government investment is a contradiction in terms, I think is erroneous. Couldn't you say, okay, sure, there's a difference between government investing money in bridges, or spending money on bridges, and spending money on the welfare state, for example. But one might say, still, bridges are not really investment. They're sort of a durable consumer good, right? Because how would you deal with that sort of criticism?
Well, isn't a durable consumer good an investment? If I build a house, that's a durable consumer good, but it's certainly an investment.
But more importantly, we have, I don't know how it is in Spain, but we have some toll roads in the United States, and they're privately built. No, those are capital goods. And we have highways that are built by the government. Those are capital goods. They're both capital goods. So you invest in both of them. You put resources to producing capital goods. That seems to me, in other words, I guess what that paper was saying is, look, if you're putting resources towards something, what difference does it make in terms of the purpose of that, whether it was done by government or the private sector? The government builds a hospital, the private sector builds a hospital. They're both hospitals.
Or take the case, the mafia criminals get money and they build a hospital. Is it an investment or not? Just because it's done in a way contrary to libertarianism shouldn't impact the economics of it.
Right.
Another issue where we diverge, and I'm sure Bill's got it on his list, is the triangle. The Hayekian Triangle is another case. I think we had. Don't ask me which of the 17 problems that we had with the triangle. It's been a while since we wrote that, but that would certainly be another example. Whereas, and you know, I still think in terms of the triangle because I was brought up in Austrian economics in terms of the triangle, but we had a whole bunches of arguments. You know, the triangle looks at the past and was supposed to be looking at the future. And then on the axes, you have two different things. One is time and the other is stages of production. And that's not kosher. You're supposed to, you know, each what do you call it? Vertical and horizontal axis is supposed to have one thing. You're not supposed to have two things floating around there. And there were many other problems with it. And by the way, in one of the footnotes, we were criticizing everybody who used the triangle. And guess who was included? Me. So I did change my mind on that because previous to Bill and I article on the triangle, I wrote about the triangle just like anyone else, like all the other Misesian, well, not Misesian, Mises never used the triangle, but Hayek certainly did, and Rothbard certainly did in Man, Economy, and State, and Hayek in Prices and Production. So here is a case where I did change my mind, and I admitted it, you know, and I think that's a good model, that if you made a mistake, you should draw attention to making a mistake. You know, we're all just human beings trying to do the best we can, and you know, I would not have wanted to have a big, long footnote of about 50 people that screwed it up and not include myself, because that would be sort of, you know, trying to paper over mistakes. And I think we should confess. Confession is good for the soul.
And you're not even Catholic.
Bill, do you want to mention another one or two problems that we had?
I think the big thing, I shouldn't say the big thing, but to me, maybe the biggest problem with the triangle, because we could talk about other things and all that. The biggest problem is that economics, you know, the study of human action is about the future, whether it's the next instant or way out there. It's not about the past. Yeah, we learn from the past and we inherit the capital goods and durable consumer goods from the past and all the knowledge and wisdom if we don't lose some of it, you know, and all that. But the way the Hayekian Triangle's done, and Hayek himself did it, they're backward looking. You know, it's, you know, you start with the triangle and you say, what happens if the interest rate's lowered? And the perfect place to find examples of that is in Garrison's Time and Money. Okay. So, you know, and fortunately, I happen to be sitting here by my whiteboard, and they say, okay, and I'll change the axes, you know, here's consumption, here's time, and they say, that's no good. And they say, okay, here's the Hayekian Triangle, and they say, oh, what happens if interest rates go down? And they say, oh, well, things look like that. We'll say, no, they didn't. This is, you got to start at the beginning and say, well, here we are. And if interest rates go down, this thing would go out like that. You got to start, instead of starting both of them there, you got to start both of them at some point in time back here, wherever it is. And that's not, I mean, that's, to me, that's the most important thing, that it's forward-looking, not backward-looking, and yet Hayek's was backward-looking, Rothbard's is backward-looking, Garrison's backward-looking, everybody I see is backward-looking. I don't understand that.
Another problem is that the ideal for them is a flatter and flatter triangle because it means a lower and lower interest rate, which means that you're going to grow faster. But really what we want is a vertical triangle. We want instantaneous stuff. I mean, that's the ideal, and that would make, on this would imply an infinite rate of interest, because if you had a vertical, just a vertical line instead of a triangle, you'd have an infinite rate of interest. So this is problematic.
Well, go ahead, Fernando.
No. Please go forward.
I said Fernando. I'm sorry, Fernando. But what I'm thinking of is that, and I think it was in that very same paper but it's one of our papers. We put an example in there. In this, you see in the Austrian economics literature all over the place that the key is to lengthen the structure of production, because that's, you lower the interest rate, you save more, and you lengthen. No. The key is, if possible, to shorten the structure of production. The problem is they only show two triangles here, One is the original, the other is the interim, where where you start here with this one, then you have an interim structure of production that looks like that. But why would you want to take longer to produce a smaller amount of goods? No, what you want to do is you want to say, here's where we are now. Look, we're willing to sacrifice, stretch out the structure of production longer and get less consumer goods in the short run, provided that in the long run, we get more. And preferably, in the long run, we do that. We get, in a shorter period of time, we get more goods. That's why we really want to invest, so that in a shorter period of time, we get more goods, not in a longer period. We're willing to lengthen the structure of production in the short run and get fewer consumer goods in order to do what? To get more consumer goods, but when? 50 years from now or 6 weeks from now? And in fact, we even put in a an arithmetical example, right? About nets and fishes and a fish and something like that, and showing that the object is to get yourself into a position where you make a sacrifice, but the sacrifice is only temporary, so that you can get the benefit, and the benefit is more goods in a shorter period of time.
Right.
And I think that's the main things in that.
Right. Just before to close, do you want to talk about the last issue, or are you? I was thinking, for example, you also have a disagreement on the fact that, according to Rothbard, you cannot shift a tax forward. I don't know, maybe you had it on the list.
It's on there. You can't look. It goes back to that same thing we were talking about before about consumer sovereignty, and all you have is, in a free society, the sovereignty of the individual, right? And the individual, if you think about production, the individual produces and consumes. And if the government comes in and extracts something out of the market with a tax, right, then both the producers and the consumers are going to be hurt. It can't be that only one of those groups is going to be hurt. They're both going to be hurt because they're the same people. Especially when you're talking about a general sales tax, as if I remember right, Murray Rothbard's title was, the incidence of a general sales tax. Everybody gets hurt.
Right.
The buyers and the producers.
Right. Walter, do you want to add something on that? Or?
Oh, I agree with Bill on that one. And we get back to Hutt's mistake and Murray's correction of Hutt, and I think that's definitive in this case as well.
Perfect. I think we're already to the hour, and I really appreciate your time. I think that we kind of covered the main topic, especially monetary theory, which it was interesting for me also to learn new things that you disagree on the phenomenon of the interest. I was wondering, I was thinking through, right, the credit aspect and trying to see whether it seems to me there's an interesting similarity with regards to maybe a Keynesian idea, or maybe, I don't know. I
hope not. I hope nothing is similar to Keynes.
Since we're almost out of time, I just wanted to throw some more bouquets. Bernardo, you said you're a student of Philip Bagus. Bill and I disagree with Philip Bagus on 1/100% of everything in Austrian libertarian economics. We disagree mainly on banking issues. But if this is the sort of student that Philip Bagus produces, such as you, Austrian economics and libertarian theory are in good hands for the next generation.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. Just obviously you've done your homework or not. I would add one thing to that. I'm sure you're aware that Philip and his gang, Jesus, was in on this, where we disagree about maturity mismatching. So but I'm looking, I don't have my copy here. I don't know where I have.
There's a book that came out, right? Your book, there's a book with your...
put together a bunch of articles. Did you notice the ones with the cost curves and that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Murray was, Murray's a genius, in my opinion, but he was fooling around with mathematics, and I know but he let a couple of things slip there, and it was ripe fruit for the picking.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Really has been an honor for us, and I'm sure that everybody enjoyed it. Muchas gracias a todos los que nos han escuchado. Espero que os haya gustado. Por favor, ponerle like si os ha gustado, y les invito a leer sobre estos temas de teoría monetaria y sobre todo los escritos del profesor Bloch y el profesor Barnett. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Take care. Regards to your gang.